Hey guys and girls, it's Nathan here and welcome back to Tuesday Night Live. Today we're going to be covering off on the boom bust cycle and what is next. So today got a few articles to read through, got a few comments on what's happening out there in the property market and in the general economy. I've got some really strange and interesting articles to read out. And a couple of other little points to talk about, which are just little bonuses about what we may see in the future from different talking points. So, getting straight into it, I got this article here the other day, got sent to me by someone, and it says, "Are we in a property boom, a bust, or a normal market?" Yeah, it's the funny thing, right? They're calling this the new normal of the property world. So let's go and read what this one has to say. In normal property market, the auction clearance rate is about 60%. There is a healthy amount of homes for sale and one buyer for each seller. The property market has eased since the recent boom, which several bidders often competed at auction for one home. As interest rates rise, buyers will be able to borrow less money, which could put a downward pressure on property prices. The property market has weakened since last autumn's boom, with plenty of competition around for what is most outstanding homes. Agents say it turned into more than a normal market. So what is a normal market? Steadily clearance rates around the 60% mark are one indicator, an agent says, as the weeks of 80% clearance rates record a year ago are sustainable over the longer period. Reading through, I just looked through this, and it's just like agents pumping up their market and saying certain things there. Some people have said, I've seen a lot of pass-ins, but at the end of the day, you were seeing a sold sign on them or seeing a sold sign on the Monday or Tuesday. That's a classic moving back into equilibrium. In terms of days on the market, it would normally take about 30 days for a home to sell, but in the strong markets, property is snapped up more quickly. So, yeah, just reading, our articles here. This one here was sent over to me by a couple of people. Some people are getting fearful. They're seeing things out there in the marketplace. So what is really happening? I guess looking at every market, there's inner markets and there's outer markets. Some markets are doing terrifically well. Some, I'm losing deals left, right, and centre in some markets. Looking at other areas, I'm seeing a bit of a squeeze and a bit of a pressure there. I'm just seeing some of the comments coming through. Hi everyone. Michael, hope your turmeric latte is doing great, mate. And welcome aboard. Keep coming on. Smash up the likes and give us a comment. Looking at what I'm seeing out there in some markets. So I've got multiple different email addresses that I use on a daily basis. Some are very process-driven email addresses. Some are my personal email addresses. And over the years, I've inquired on, I'd hate to think how many properties I've inquired on over the last sort of 2 decades. But looking at it, I constantly get put on to agent spam, right? That I inquire about a property, and that's why I have different email addresses for, because I just open home, and I look at each open home on a Thursday or on a Friday or on a Wednesday when they send them out, and you'll see like 50 LJ hookers. Every local LJ hooker in the area would have their template that goes out with the different properties in that location. And I'm certainly, I get these things every week. There's thousands of emails that come from real estate agents every week. And looking at, some markets, I'm seeing new price adjustment. Prices have been put onto the property. So in some markets, I'm starting to see, people get fearful and all that. But if you remember going back at the start of 2020, we also saw a very similar thing occur, which was when the market, everyone got scared and some people were, making silly decisions. But I do feel that looking at the whole market, there is a bit of, softening in some pockets. Some areas, I just did a bulk deal. The reason why I'm a little bit late to the Facebook is I was sending out some emails to my investors. I just did a bulk deal for $105,000 for a 2-bedroom unit. Now, if you guys remember, going back in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, in a lot of areas, markets were booming. Not all markets were booming. This property they were selling for 350,000 in the street, and here we are at the end of 2012 in 2022, and we're picking up 105,000 for a property. You can't even build a granny flat for that sort of price. So when we look at what's out there, how far could a $105,000 property fall? If it was going for 300,000 10 years ago, and it's renting for 12% or about $250 a week today, you'd have to question, right? We've got high rents, we've got lower interest rates. 10 years ago, interest rates were 8%. We've got interest rates now at 3%, 4%, whatever you're all paying for these things. So some markets, even though we've seen big property booms out there, have gone backwards over the years. And those markets are starting to take off now. And I guess it's very important to look at the outer market, which is everything around the world, and where the economy is going in general, as well as the inner market of what is happening there. So if we look at the Gold Coast, that market is still very, very hot. If we look at the Sunshine Coast, that market is still very, very hot. It's come off a little bit, but not as much as maybe some of those other areas that are $1.5 million for a house with no eaves attached to it. Now, I think when we go on to our next article, which we'll pull a few little pieces of paper across, it's very important to look at the affordability, which that last article talked about, the affordability. If people's incomes can't afford certain prices, there's a couple of things, right? This is what I always look at, the upside potential. So when I analyze deals, I go on to make a deal happen for myself, for my clients, I'm thinking about who's the next buyer of it, who's going to be the person that takes the bag and runs with it and takes the price from 1 million to 2 million or 2 million to 4 million and watch that thing double. So I think about it, I think, what are the people getting paid? What's happening with their lifestyle? How much do they have left over so they can pay for their mortgage? How would that mortgage double? And a very easy way to look at it is the interest rates, right? The properties didn't go up recently. The money bought less and it was very cheap to buy money. So as we start seeing rates go up, it's going to become more unaffordable and harder for people to get into those markets. So the top end and those areas which are between the 1.2 and the $1.8 million mark, which everyone seems to be playing in, and shit properties are going up to that level and whatnot, there will be volatility in there. But there will be more buyers that can afford in the bottom end of the market, which is more cheaper and affordable. So it's very important to understand that there's many different factors moving markets, and property is not one of those linear markets. If you think the property market's going to crash, there's been a lot of different factors, whether it be, there's actually a few days ago, so I just got emails keep popping through, I hate the emails here coming through. There was a video I saw the other day, and I shared it, I think it was on one of the property forums out there, and somehow it came my way, and I sent it to my marketing. So if Carolyn's watching this, cut that video and send it off to Facebook and to Instagram and share with everyone the 1990s articles that were out there. So on a current affair, basically it had, back in the 1990s, where you'd have a window card, so you'd have the picture with, you go to the real estate office now, they've all got TVs on them, but in the 1990s, 2000s, and anywhere up until about 10 years ago, you'd walk past a real estate office and you'd see these window cards. They're just a piece of paper with a house on it. It was all printed nowadays, like you could have it like that, where it's printed on one piece. But back in the old days, you'd have a photo, you'd have to go to Big W or whatever, you'd put the photo on, then you'd have all the writing on the side. And literally the window cards from 1990s, and it said, we're going to go to the biggest property crash ever. It was in 1996. It was in the John Howard era. Allegedly in Sydney, we're going to have a big property crash. And these window cards said, prices have been slashed. 159,000 down to 149,000, right? We had GST, we had the Y2K bug, we had September 11, we had GFC, we've had the GFD, which was in 2017-18. We've had instabilities out in the market. We've had the scam that we've all seen the last couple of years. And what has happened? They just created a new, bigger Ponzi scheme by making the value of money cheaper and pushing up these asset prices. So interesting to see. This one here is Australia's housing market faces its biggest test in 30 years. I think this one's a Bloomberg one, potentially. Um, so one of the world's most expensive property markets faces its biggest test in more than 30 years. Australia's $10 trillion residential real estate sector will this year have to absorb the sharpest interest rate increases since 1989. The sharpest interest rate increases since 1989. So they're saying interest rates are going to go up very sharply. Well, of course it will, because the interest rate just tripled from 10 basis points to 35 basis points, and it will probably go up next month as well, and next month as well after that. So it's going to be very, very interesting. It says here, if bond markets are right. The Reserve last week began its tightening cycle of 11.5 years, shaking the confidence with consumers with some of the world's highest debt loads. After surging on the back of the scamdemic stimulus over the last couple of years, economists expect house prices to fall and building to slow as borrowing costs rise. That turnaround was on display at a weekend auction in the city suburb of Darlington. So we're going to start seeing some of these inconsistencies out there. But the question is that this is a market. I'm fearful of the rat style. I'll just tuck it in the back there. With the market that we're seeing at the moment, there is instability out there with some of these areas. But when we look at the greater market of some of the things that are going to happen out there, which I just need to have a look here. Yeah. You've got the property market over here. I'll leave that there. I won't throw it yet. But then you go to this article here, which is retailers brace for a grim time as spending dries up. So we've seen one interest rate rise. Right? It's nothing. 2 years ago, everyone's interest rate at the bank, at the RBA was 1.5% or 150 basis points. Today, it went down all the way down to 10 basis points. So it lost 15 times. It went down 15 times basically, and now it's gone up from 10 basis points to 35. Yet if we wanted to get back to where we were for basically the last 4 to 5 years, we'd have to get to 150 basis points, which would equal about 5 to 6 times going up. We've had one increase, and let's see what is happening out there. So some of these articles are from the news, which I don't like, and I've got a couple of funny stories to talk about later about the news. But this one here is more from a industry sort of page, which, yeah, I don't have it here because it chopped off when I printed it. Party's over, retail's brace for grim times as spending dries up. Australia's retail assemblage has been warmed to whole for a pugnacious play up arsenic, the compounding pressures of inflation, anemic user assurance, and worsening corona lawsuit numbers endanger non-stop spending plummeting. Most retailers enjoyed an unprecedented roar of successful user spending during the scamdemic, notably online arsenic authority stimulus fueled buying during lockdown. So over past week, marketplace analysts cautioned that their clients that the corona-induced sweetener deed appears to person good and generally worn off. Analysts person warned retailers to brace for important autumn. Very weird how their words are formed here. Basically, the article goes on to read, compounding this further pressures affecting shoppers' wallets, including rising involvement in interest rates and powerfulness prices. The reopening of planetary question has besides prompted much spending on non-retail categories. In short, retail is getting screwed. So we've seen interest rates go up. A few weeks ago, I was talking about the pressures that we would see on the retail market. Why did they increase interest rates? They're increasing interest rates due to the fact that inflation is rampant, right? Why did the inflation start? Because they printed off all this cheap money. But as they start putting up the interest rates, as they start taking away that stimulus spending, we're starting to see lots of things fold. I'm missing my really fun article that's here. There's an article, there's a really fun article that's to come up a little bit later. Oh, here we go. There's the special article. There's a special article for us to run over a little bit later. But so as we have a look here, here's a new news.com article which came out just this afternoon. If you go to news.com, you'll see this is one of the most top articles, because I just went on the page and printed this off about 10 minutes before we went live. So this article reads, Australia's truck industry facing an imminent collapse due to the 22-cent fuel tax credit. Truck companies could face a collapse and grocery bills could soar due to a disastrous and ill-advised decision made by the previous government. So this is now coming out that it's a Liberal fault, right? It doesn't matter who is in the seat, we're heading off a cliff, and that cliff is turbocharged with inflation. So the cost of anything that you're paying today, you're never going to be able to buy it for the price that you are today due to the rampant amount of inflation. So this is where we get to really unprecedented times, and this is, I've said, between 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, that we've been in a depression. We're now in 2022, and I don't believe that we are out of a depression. We are in a hyperinflationary depression, and we've now got some instability here because they're trying to move the levers, right? So what we've got is we've got high inflation, we've got massive amounts of inflation coming through, and they've tried to put up interest rates. What does interest rates do as they rise? A, it might soften the market a little bit, but B, it means the cost of everything else out there is going to rise. So we're now going to start seeing rising of the price being absorbed by retailers, right? As retailers are putting it up, people may not spend as much and will enter into recession. So the way that they're going to get themselves out of the recession is to just print more and more and more of this money. So there's articles here, worrying signs that more builders would fall. We've got ProBuild, we've got all these building companies. Every day you're looking out there and there's some other builder, small builder, big builder, that's gone bust to the wall. And interesting sort of times. An ill-advised decision left by the previous federal government has truck companies fearing imminent collapse. So we've now seen the collapse of building companies. We've seen the collapse of a few other industries that are out there. We've started to see crypto go down, shares go down, precious metals go down. We've got them trying to play with the pricing of property. So where is a real safe haven? Is it to have cash in the bank, right? That would be the most obvious one, to have cash in the bank, that is to be safe there. I think someone's just posted the article here, which, yeah, Hayden's done. Thanks for that, mate. So people would fear and go and run to a safe asset like cash in the bank. But the problem being is that, as now we're seeing in prices increase, that's not even safe. So there's two options here. One is they let the bitch blow up, which inevitably it's going to have to one day blow up, and that's when we go through a currency reset. Or in the meanwhile, they can try and strap it together by doing more stimulus packages. So stimulus packages could mean no more rate hikes. They might mean that they've got to drop interest rates. Everyone's fearful of interest rate increases at the moment. I'm more fearful about interest rate decreases, which will occur very shortly. Whether that's this year, the year after that, they're going to have to stimulate this economy, otherwise it blows everyone's fingers off. So we've got here an imminent collapse of the truck industry. According to a survey conducted by Australian Road Transport Association, 57% of businesses could be faced with bankruptcy due to the changes made by the coalition government to the diesel fuel tax credit. So let's just go back through that. 57% of businesses could be faced with bankruptcy due to the changes made. It's not to do with any government, right? It's to do with the fact that if they didn't manipulate the figures, right, the whole system would have blown up anyway, because people would be paying $3 a litre in petrol. And this is why I talk about inflation. It doesn't matter about your household. It doesn't matter about the house. It doesn't matter about anything. It is the business world which will blow up. So if we have higher costs of delivery, that would mean that your groceries are going to go up. So when you go to the shops, you're going to not be able to buy the same amount. It means that the electricity that is rising at a rampant rate, I think it's going up by another 18% next month. It means that your electricity costs are going up. It means that when you go to Woolworths or any shop and they have all the food sitting there in the freezer and they have the lights going on, that's going to cost a lot more for your food to come to you, so they have to mark up the price on that. It means that when their interest rates go up, that they're going to have to pass that cost on. It's going to create even greater pressure. So then, as this more pressure enters into the market, we're going to need to see some stimulus packages. This could come from free packages of, stimulus checks, here, there, everywhere, like we've been seeing, but even greater. Who remembers that when Kevin Rudd and his $900 cash back thing, he gave everyone $900 or whatever, it seemed like the biggest, craziest thing ever. There's literally businesses out there now which are getting 20 grand a year for, employing people, right? They're stimulating businesses. They're stimulating all of different parts of the system, whether it's a corona or a flood, this, that, the next thing. You can literally find it out. There's websites, government websites, to apply for grants and be able to get grants for different areas of your life. So they're literally printing out money and going, here's 10 grand, here's 10 grand. It's like Oprah with, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Not that I like her, I'm very anti her, but it's a different story for a different day. Previously, freight companies would receive 17.8 cents back per litre. However, this was cut to 4.3% per litre from March 30. The move has been lashed by SARTA Chief Executive Steve Shearer. He says that diminished tax credits run for the entire 6 months of the proposed. It is due to run out on September 28. The industry could face an unfathomable consequences. He told Adelaide advertisers that the truck industry had essentially been forced to fund the consumer full excise cut. However, it was not sustainable. So none of these packages are sustainable. We do not live in a fair, free, economy. It's all completely manipulated. In a letter to Scott Morrison, Mr. Smith said the reaction of trucks on the roads would lead to supply chain issues, which could add $20 per week to the average household food bill. That's just $20, right? If you've looked at your shopping and your grocery, I'm sure you'd realise that your groceries have gone up more than $20 a week. I went into Woolworths going back, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I go in there every now and then, but I went in there and I remember thinking I need a drink, right? I wanted to have a drink. So I felt like having some sort of nice fresh juice. And I went in and I looked at all the juices, right? And I started looking at the products and the prices that were on the shelf. And I realized, like 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, you could find stuff for $2, $1, 80 cents, $1.50, $1.80, $2.30, $2.70, whatever. However, when I went in the shops, it was like going into a $2 store back in the 90s, but there was nothing really under $5. So if you look at things that you'd see on the shelf, the cost of everything's rising. The difference between a small bottle and a 1 litre or 2 litre bottle is not much difference now, because everything is being pressured up due to handling of the goods, the delivery of the goods, so on and so forth. So when we look at things like this, we've got our property markets that everyone's fearing about. We've got, is that market going to crash? Is the stock market going to crash? Whatever they do, they've got to fix up the issues of inflation, and they're going to have to print their way through. And as they print their way through, these things will all be a blip on the radar. So talking about all the bullshit out there in the news, this would have to be the one that takes the cake that I've ever seen in the markets. So this one here is from a science page. It's actually from earth.com, and it actually got re-put onto the Daily Mail. And it came my way because it actually said on there that climate change is now causing heart attacks. Believe it or not, right? Climate change is causing heart attacks. There's been lots of articles in the last year, heart attacks occurring due to people watching too much TV, heart attacks occurring because of many different things. It's a very controversial one because a lot of people are experiencing heart issues due to foreign substances in their bodies. Anyway, this article goes on to read, highly reactive chemicals discovered in the Earth's atmosphere due to climate change is causing lung issues and heart issues, cardiovascular issues. So a lot of people are having lung issues nowadays. A lot of people are having issues with hearts stopping and blowing up. And yeah, let's go and read on. The professor, I can't read it, it's got like really weird digits on the guy's name, Kargard, professor of chemistry at the University of Copenhagen. The type of compounds were discovered are unique in their structure, and because they are extremely oxidizing, is most likely bring a host of effects we have yet to uncover. According to the professor, him and his colleagues, hydrotrioxides are formed during the atmospheric decompression of many widely admitted substances such as isophrene and some sulfate. In fact, researchers estimate that all of chemical compounds can form these in the atmosphere with lifespans ranging from minutes to hours. Thus, these substances are stable enough to react with many other atmospheric compounds. The scientists suspect that these oxides are able to enter in tiny airborne particles called aerosols, which can easily be inhaled and can lead to various health hazards, including cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. When I saw it, they actually went and changed. I went to look for the Daily Mail article. I found it, but they've changed it. They go, the climate change is causing heart attacks. That was the heading of the story. Climate change is causing heart attacks, right? What is the next story that they're going to come up with? And this is what I believe that we're going to start seeing. I think we're going to see us go from our flu period that we're going into, or we've been into. We're going to see some more of that, but we're going to go into an energy crisis and a climate crisis as the next stage, which we've talked about beforehand. Off the back of that, I think we could see animals potentially getting sick and them having to kill certain animals and us to be eating more of the food that they manufacture for us, right? And we get to enjoy fake meat because it's better for the environment, better for all these things. And it makes me question if all these cows and these methane gases that are causing all this problem to occur, how do you actually make fake meat? You would need to grow whatever it is or create the plastics they put in the food or whatever it is that they're putting into the food, and then that would have to be manufactured in plants and then causing more issues with the climate. And this all coincides very coincidentally to last week's meeting in Davos in Switzerland, where the World Economic Forum met and came out with lots of predictions about the future, which we're going to start seeing them go through all the media outlets out there, and you can start reading in between the gaps as to what the next agenda will be. So if you're wanting to see what they're going to blame next, keep an eye out for it, keep diligent, and keep questioning the rhetoric, because I don't believe, now I'm no scientist and I could be completely utterly wrong. So there's my little disclaimer there, but I find it very interesting that there's lots of people with these so-called heart issues, and as their heart issues are occurring, it just happens to be climate change that's now causing this. And yeah, on that note, actually, what else did I have to talk about here? I think that's pretty much it. The markets, just as a bit of a wrap up of what I'm seeing out there, it's still a little bit too early days to see, but you know, there's no glut of stock that's occurring out there in the marketplace. I haven't seen crazy bargains that are out there. I would love to see them. The biggest exciting day of my life would be to see the property market crash. So all the people that are out there as doomsayers, I couldn't find anything more exciting than seeing a property crash. Yes, my wealth in property would go down if I compared it to fiat currency. However, I could accumulate more assets with our heavily devalued currency and take that through as they devalue the currency more and see those assets go up in value. So just my 2 cents on that and my thoughts of what is happening out there. Going to keep tonight's live very short and to about a half an hour to 45 minutes. It is very cold. I've got a heater going in here. It's cold on the window. I'm pretty cold today, and yeah. So looking at some of your questions, if you've got any questions on anything that's happening out there, flick us a message. I see here Michelle is online. Michelle is our licensee from Queensland, where we've got many staff on the ground, and Michelle looks after them, looking after rental properties. So I saw, if we talk about inflation, not just the cost of people's home expenses going up, but the opportunity, right, that comes with interest rate increases, certain things that happen out there. The opportunity that I see is that rents are going up. I've seen there was an email that came through. Someone's rent today went up by $200 per week, right? On average, they're about 90, 100, 110 bucks per week rental increases that I'm seeing in Queensland, whether that be on the Gold Coast or far north Queensland. That inflation is not just hitting, everybody's food, but it's hitting the living costs as well. If you're an investor with debt and you're leveraged and you've got lots of assets and those rents are starting to increase, that is a good thing as well for you as the investor, obviously not as the end user. So interesting time on that front. Shoutouts had a place sell for over 1 million a few weeks ago. Good old Shoutouts. For those of you that aren't familiar with Shoutouts, if we had a market crash, right? Shoutouts, I'm choosing my words very correctly to be politically correct on this one. Shoutouts is in a postcode called 2770, which has for many years been deemed as the poorest suburb of Sydney and the roughest. They made a show called, what was that show called? It was like on an ABC. It was about poor people, the poorest people in Sydney, and they really made Mount Druitt people look bad, right? So just to put things in perspective, it's not the upper class area of Sydney, it's the entry point. You want to go to the cheapest area of Sydney, you go to the 2770 postcode and you'll find the cheapest properties there. Michael has pointed out that Shoutouts has seen a place sell for over $1 million a few weeks ago. I'm not that familiar with that market with the finger on the pulse today, because I wouldn't buy anything out there because I just see that the value is not there. I used to buy houses in Shoutouts for $100,000 10 years ago, and the wages in Mount Druitt and that 2770 postcode have not gone up 10 times in the last decade, but the price of the house has gone up by 10 times. Why is the market in I've seen someone say we've got a house for sale in here? Well, it's not a place for spruiking, but yeah. The interesting thing is, and it's interesting, Paul, that you said that your house is coming up for sale. Houses in Mount Druitt are selling for the same as houses in Parramatta, the same prices as houses in the hills. Would I want to live in Kellyville and find a little cheap house there if I could for 1.1, 1.2, or do I want to live in Shoutouts for $1 million? The reason why these have been able to go up so high is just due to lending, the affordability of being able to repay or service that debt. You're never going to repay the debt, don't worry about that. You're not, just servicing that debt. If you have a $100,000 loan at a 10% interest rate or $1 million loan at a 1% interest rate, the expense per week is still the same outcome. It's still $10,000 a year. So they can play with these figures, and that's what's going to ultimately put, pressures into the market for up or down. The other, we've got here, what question we've got? How were you planning to pay for potatoes? Interesting question. There's some old pennies there, right? I don't know, there's little silver bars, right? Just random little things that float around, right? Literally find things to trade in, because people will not want to take pieces of plastic, which is our money, with dead criminals printed on them. Soon it's going to become impossible to be able to get access to cash. I actually had some trades I've got at the moment. There's still about 8 renos going on, and when I say 8 renos, I just ordered 1,000 square meters of tiles to get delivered to one site this week to tile the place. There's 40 bathrooms in one place. There's a minimum of 20 bathrooms in each place. Some of my trades like getting paid in cash, which I unfortunately don't get paid in cash. I need to go and find that cash from an ATM or from a bank to be able to give to the trades. And it's very rare, and only to a couple of people, that I will pay them with the cash. I went around looking for hours the other day trying to find an ATM to go and pull cash from to give to a trade, due to the fact that there's no ATMs. They're taking the ATMs, they're taking the banks. The banks are not allowing you to take out more than $5,000 or $10,000 cash, so you have to deal with the digital credit system, which we're being forced, and third line forced into being able to use. The other day, someone sent me an article about Woolworths Metro not accepting cash anymore, right? It was a sign that they're not accepting cash. You can't pay in cash. You have to pay with digital funds. So how will you be paying for things? That's what I've been talking about for the last 2 years. Protect yourself. You can have assets, which is good, but you need cash flow. You need the ability to have your own food, grow your own food, have a good community of people that you can trade with and barter with. If you've got a hairdresser to cut off a rat's tail, if you've got a butcher to cut up an animal, if you've got a mechanic to fix your car, these are all good, handy people to have around you that you can trade with in the event that you can't use your money. And history has shown that all currencies, all fiat currencies, turn to zero because they lose their value. So, yeah, important to look at. What else we've got here? Up, down, round and round. As long as the system is designed to fail, just keep betting on it failing. Exactly. Shorting the dollar, that's actually an interesting one, because the opposite to having cash, right? If someone has cash, you have, let's say you've got $1,000 in your bank account. What is the opposite to having $1,000 in your bank account? That's debt. That's to have the $1,000 as a loan. So someone has $1,000 in their account, someone has negative $1,000, right? In a great reset, you would see all that money would be worthless anyway, and they'd scrap it and go to another system, which is basically what is happening with the ESG movement, which was very heavily talked about in Davos last week. Looking at the opposite to cash is debt, right? So how can you short the dollar? We can have more debt because it creates more money in the system, and it creates a bigger problem out there, and that's what everyone is contributing to. Savers will be wiped out in this. Do have your capital into other sort of assets. Business in the front, party at the back. Give us a look at the back. Here we go. It's so bad, guys. It's so bad. It was platted the other day. I started growing it, and I thought the more you put in, the harder it is to let go sometimes. I'm never going to grow it again. So I thought, let's see what happens with this. I don't know anyone that likes it. I understand it looks like shit, and just something different because I can. If times get tough, I can go get myself a job at JB Hi-Fi with your haircut. What else have we got here? Michelle, rent in Queensland is on fire. It's starting to happen everywhere. Rents rising. So if you're a renter, be prepared. You're going to start seeing inflation. If you're an owner of an asset that collects rent, look at the importance of being able to push that up. Luke, what are your thoughts on Labor's co-ownership scheme? I actually did a video last week all about the Labor Party getting in, the policies, all that sort of stuff. So if I can direct you, Luke, back to last week's Facebook Live, it would be exactly 1 week from today, same time, same place, every week. I did a lot about it on there, so I won't go into too much boring everyone there, but that whole video was about, those sorts of things. I think that it's, in short, right, I think that's a new Ponzi scheme to push the market up higher, because if everyone has now a barrier of entry, which is a 2% deposit, and they're only having to pay for 60% of it, well then, the government or the product that the government is creating, they're just going to create bonds around the home ownership. They're going to want to inflate that so they're getting a greater return on it. They're saying that they can't save their cash, so they can just take advantage of this market out there by creating an even bigger Ponzi scheme and hopefully retire debt at some point, or sell off that bond to a private corporation as a new financial instrument. But in short, my thought on it is to create a new Ponzi scheme to create that bubble to get even bigger. Michael, that's an interesting one, all right? People from Queensland will come to Sydney and Melbourne for cheaper rent and job opportunities. Interesting when you say that, because in a lot of instances, there's a lot better value in Sydney today in some areas, just due to the fact that prices haven't caught up in Sydney because it's been smashed due to the last 2 years. What has gone on? Howzo's, no, Howzo's was the funny show, Danielle. That was the Fat Pizza guys, Paul Fennick, that did that. Struggle Street, that's the one. Struggle Street. It was a TV series about Mount Druitt. Um, uh, Lethbridge Park, $780,000 the other week. I remember a decade, probably 13 years ago when I first started B.Invested. I was doing seminars. I'd have like 500 people in an audience, and I'd talk about buying houses in Mount Druitt. I was renovating them. I used to, be more active on tools and stuff like that. And I remember people saying, "Why would you ever buy Mount Druitt? It's never going to go up. $200,000, $180,000. It's stupid. Don't waste your money." 780,000, $1 million. It's very, very, you know, good looking back in hindsight. But what are you going to look back in 10 years' time from now and go, shit, my opinion didn't add up, right? Your opinions, facts are very different things. So be very cautious, be very diligent out there in the marketplace, to make right moves, understanding that they've got access to a lot of resources. In the world that we're in today financially is not the world that we've been in for the last 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. There's a lot more risk attached to it. If someone's buying a house in Mount Druitt for $1 million today, they've got a hell of a lot more risk than what I have for my properties that are bought for 200,000, and others of those of you that are watching that that have bought previously beforehand as well. Dave said, just wanted to do a shout out to Michelle for getting me really significant rent increase. I think everyone's giving shout outs to Michelle at the moment because of the rent increases. Yeah, some of our investors have got 50 grand a year extra income now because they've got their foundation portfolio of 10, 15 properties, and they get $50 here, $20 there, $80 there, and all those dollars account something, and that's the ability to retire. And I guess the most exciting part about this market and seeing my investors that have been working with for the last 10 years, 12 years, 13 years in business, and just ones that have started in the last 2 years or 3 years or 12 months, be able to actually, get an extra 30, 40, 50K a year. Granted, at the moment, that extra 50K or 40 grand or 30 grand, it used to be, I can replace my wage for 50 grand a year. But now it's just that 50 grand a year will help me keep up with inflation and not be left behind having to eat fake meat and heaps of microplastics in my food, and I can have a relatively comfortable life. And that's why I called B.Invested our slogan, live life on your terms, because you want to have choices, you want to have options. The properties are just doing that. Shane said, do you foresee Labor introducing new taxes off the back of the so-called energy crisis / climate change? I believe that they will, but I actually don't think they'll do it in the format of taxes. I think if we go back and understand that the silent tax is inflation, right? With inflation, what I believe that Labor will do, and time will be shown to what will happen at this, I believe that Labor will do stimulus packages around if you are a good boy or girl and you go and drive a green car, i.e. some Tesla or some shit that's electric, that they can track and trace, and as a part of their new system and network that they're forcing everyone to be installed into, they will give you a little rebate, and they'll say, here's 10 grand for buying an electric car, here's 5 grand for getting solar installed into your house. So there's all these rebates, grants and stimulus packages that people will get for obeying and doing the right thing by becoming into the green energy climate sort of world. The tax is that the person that doesn't do that green energy stuff will be taxed with inflation, and they won't have that money, so they've got a, a lesser advantage as what the obeying and the one that's at servitude to the system will get. Karam said, if you have to choose between your primary residence in the city, lifestyle choice, or buy a farmland where you can create self-sustainability, which would you choose? That is not even a question. That is just an obvious one. The residence in the city or a lifestyle. Depends what your lifestyle choice is. If you want to live in the city, then live in the city. But the ability to be self-sufficient, independent, and have like more options, it would be the lifestyle one. The farmland is lifestyle, not being stuck in a unit. I look at traffic, right? And if you look at traffic, you look at the confinements of cities. Everyone's stuck in on top of each other. The royalty, you've never seen a royalty or a king or a queen of any capacity or any nation ever sit there and go, I'm going to live in a unit or in a unit complex, or want to be living in a city. They're living on estates, like big, large, rolling estates out where they can control things. For me, lifestyle is about having the freedom to have animals, to have my own produce, to have the ability to grow trees. No one's going to tell me if I can grow 100 chickens and then kill them if I want and eat them, or eat the eggs, and that's my choice if I can do that. Not promoting violence or that to animals for people that might get upset by that, but yeah. Michelle just said there, like Nathan said, we're revenue managers, we got you. If you went to your property manager today, and this isn't just a big spruiking session for Blink Property, but by all means, flick us a message. If you have a rental property and my team is not managing it, you're probably getting shafted from a lack of rental. Ask your property manager, how are you going to manage my revenue, right? Ask them what a revenue manager is, because they won't even understand what a revenue manager is, because they're not. They're just a real estate officer, like, oh, I'm just a property manager, right? But if you're a revenue manager, you're managing the revenue of that property. So that's why, with my firm, I've always tried to create it more like a hedge fund, where we're trying to extract every single cent that we can mainly for myself, for my own properties, but for you guys as the investors as well. So Andy said, do you think property is still the best hedge against inflation? It's not all about property. The business is called B.Invested. I'm just looking at my logo on the side of the screen, that's why I'm poking my finger at that. B.Invested, it's not Birchie's Property Group or any of that sort of stuff. I thought about it very deeply when I first started the business 13 years ago. I'm an investor. My favourite go-to is property, but it doesn't mean property is the only thing that's out there. Investing in your health is very important. Investing in your freedom is important. Investing into your own food and supply chain, your own personal supply chain, and that's probably one of the biggest assets right now that anyone could have, is their own little, supplies, having access to supplies. Continuation. That's not, stacking, 1,000 kilos of rice in your basement in case a war comes. That's having access to produce and farming and all that sort of stuff as well. But liquidity is very important. So I joked about, here's a bag of pennies. I think there's probably 2 kilos of pennies there. Looks about that size. 2 kilos of pennies. They're probably $15 a kilo. They're worth, so it might be $30 there. But what did a penny buy you before, when these had value, right? A penny could buy you a loaf of bread. So if we went back in a currency collapse, this here might be $30 today, but the copper value's worth $30 in there. And if you could buy, let's say there's about 100 pennies in 2 kilos, that could be 100 loaves of bread. At $5 a loaf of bread, that's $500. What's the barterability? So you need liquidity. Even dollars, even cash in the bank, it's important to have some, because if we go through a crunch or some sort of squeeze. I was actually just chatting to someone on a map session earlier, and they had a large amount of money, and we're talking about, you could buy properties cash, but the smarter way would be to get the loan on the properties. So yes, you can offset your cash against it if you want to, but then if something goes wrong, you've still got access to all your capital, and you'd have to go and beg the bank for it. So having access to cash, having access to resources, having access to precious metals, having access to food, having access to a community, having access to the thing that property does is it goes up with inflation, the debt becomes cheaper, you can leverage debt, right? The cash is losing its value. So what's more value is having debt with an asset that's being increased in value. That's why I like property for. And not only that, is times like now, we're seeing that the cash flow is getting inflated away, not just the asset that's being inflated away. So it's all a part of having a good, solid strategy and overall plan. Everybody's position is different, and it's important to make sure that your strategy is in line with your goals. The best states to buy now, there's also opportunities out there everywhere. I buy nationally from corner to corner of the country. When I say corner, I mean every little weird and wonderful place that you may or may not have ever heard of beforehand. Luke said, hey Birch, is it best to lock in a 6-month lease rather than 12 months to get more regular rent increases? I'm a fan of having shorter leases. Different locations, different state and regulatory environments would mean that you may not be able to put the rent up as much in some areas. But in this sort of environment of inflation, personally, I want the shortest amount of lease, but you need to also be mindful that if you're in a place like Queensland, where legislation is that your insurance isn't valid if you don't have a valid lease, etc., it could cause more trouble. So just speak with your property manager or your revenue manager, whoever you're using, to work out what's best in your local area, but make sure that you're on top of your rents and you're collecting the cash flow. Because if you don't put your property up by $50 a week and you've got 10 of them, that's $500 a week, that's 26 grand in a year. You could lock yourself out and be doing yourself a disservice from having the wrong person looking after your property. Rob said, do you think property will go up much during hyperinflation? How much higher do you reckon? Some people saying that hyperinflation slows house price because when people can't afford a loaf of bread, they ain't going to own a house. Very important, good point. I've looked through and all the research that I've done throughout other countries' hyperinflations, whether it be in Germany, whether it be in Hungary, wherever it is, there's a point where the whole society just collapses, right? There is a point where the whole of society collapses. People can't afford a loaf of bread, so they're not going to pay rent. But generally at that point, a 50 grand wage is now $2 million a year. That $2 million a year in 6 months' time won't buy you a loaf of bread. So your debt becomes irrelevant and everything goes out of whack at that point, and you want to hold on to the physical asset. Because the reason being is that you've got a house. It's not like you've got shares. It's not like you've got crypto. It's not like you've got whatever. Your property has human labor to go into building those bricks and the kitchen and the electrical and the wall and all those bits that are required to build a house. All of that gets inflated away with inflation as well. So you could literally have a house and go, it's worth fuck all, if you were to feel that way. But the window, if someone went and bought a second-hand window, it'd be worth more than the whole house would cost today. So, and probably the best way that you could look at this is if you go and look up, I don't know, a Datsun 1600, I'm just pulling that car out, a Datsun 1600, I don't know what they're worth today, maybe 30 grand, 40 grand. Someone could laugh at me and say I'm way off the mark. I don't know, right? Whatever it's worth. But you could go and find a door off a Datsun 1600 and it might cost you $1,000. But in 1970, the car might have cost $1,000. In 2005, the car might have been worth $80 or $100. Could have been ready for the tip. But now to get that door, the value is much greater. Because the cost of recreating that door would be far less economical. So when you're looking at the property, when you're looking at anything through a hyperinflationary, you want to be looking for things of value that are converted to dollars. And there will be glitches and inconsistencies. Sometimes things will be of value, sometimes things will not. As I was saying beforehand, buying a house in Mount Druitt for $1 million today is not of value to me. Buying, 10 acres somewhere in Sydney for $3 million would be of value. Um, it's in comparison to all those things. So there's waves and cycles that you go through as inflation hits. We're just seeing it on a very micro level at the moment, but as things ramp up, we're going to see it as we enter into hyperinflation. And we're getting our first dose of a hyperinflation right now, and for a lot of people it will be scary for them. Even for myself, I'm like, the cost of tiles, the cost of this, the cost of that. I'm fortunate enough that cost of labour on a lot of trade sites hasn't really been impacted as much as the cost of the goods, but it will flow on to that. That's why I'm investing into those things now, because I'm going to pick up on the cash flow on the other side, and I want to make sure that I've picked up everything before hyperinflation. Sometimes people ask me, is it worthwhile paying off debt now? Will you ever pay off debt? There will be a point that I pay off debt, but all that new extra cash flow and the revenue that's being created, I'm going to be taking that and paying out the debt in the future, and that'll probably be in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years is when I'll look at debt. More towards the later part of this, closer to 2030, would be my thought on my personal position. High inflation is starting to truly show its face. For example, petrol prices, food prices. Why do you think gold is not inflating against the dollar right now? Is it being manipulated? Two thoughts on that front. I do believe that lots of things are being manipulated. Gold and silver and precious metals are one of those things that are being manipulated and suppressed down. But secondly, if you had, let's say for instance, someone had Bitcoin, right? And Bitcoin was 100,000 and it was also $2,000. It hasn't been 100, but just assume, right? Let's assume that the Bitcoin's worth 100 grand. You have a Bitcoin worth 100 grand, but you can't afford anything because we're going through a deflationary cycle, and you were like, I've got to pay for the kids' food or the kids' nappy or whatever the case may be. You'll have to make that decision. Do I have, a silver bar? Do I have a Bitcoin, or do I eat food for the next week or next month? And those decisions will have to fall onto certain people, and they will be shaken out from holding their assets. And at that point, someone else will obtain that physical asset. And that's the shift of wealth between one hand to the other. If you have cash flow right, if you have assets right, if you have the ability to access all the things that you need, so you're not participating with expenses that are being hyperinflated, you're insulating yourself for the best runway throughout this cycle. So I think that some things are being held down, manipulated to the max, right? Imagine if, and I found this humorous when everybody's Lord Savior Elon Musk went out and he said, buy Bitcoin, it's the best thing ever. This guy's like the biggest, face of an agenda, right? It's just my view. And he goes, buy Bitcoin, buy Dogecoin, buy all these sorts of things. He should have said, buy silver, for example, right? And I'm not one of these silver bugs that are like, silver's the greatest thing ever, go load up on it. It doesn't bring cash flow, it does have its risks. There's lots of things that are negative to that as well. Just ask anyone that bought silver 10 years, 15 years ago when it used to be $50 an ounce, and now it's $30 an ounce in Aussie dollars. But if he had have said the best investment is silver, what would happen is that his car prices would go up dramatically. The iPhone, I'm looking at getting a new iPhone because my one's run out of storage, and that takes an ounce of silver. Everything that we're using takes a silver. So if he was to say the truth, well then that would push the price up, and people wouldn't be speculating in crypto, they'd be going to metals, for example. So all these avatars and all these controlled heroes out there, you've got to be thinking about their agendas as well. So just to be mindful. Housing, gold, silver, Bitcoin, food supplies, access to community, power of people. No one's got to, I'm putting my fingers like this one and then this one, right? No one has access to guns out there, so you need the power of people in case something goes really wrong. And we've always lived in this insulated world. We've never been exposed to a war-torn world, or a world which has got lots of turmoil and instability. And I'm excited by it, but I still believe that we're heading into a very a lot of unrest out there for a lot of people. Myth had asked, why didn't rates go negative? They're just manipulating. They've printed lots and lots of money via stimulus packages and different sorts of programs that they're putting out there for the market, which has started to cause massive inflation. I believe that the negative interest rates are still on the cards, and it will be only a matter of time. As of, I think it's September or October this year, the banks have now got the ability to go negative, where their banking system, where the programs wouldn't allow them to go bank to negative beforehand. So the central banks around the world have got that right, and banks will be able to go negative in the future. But we're still technically negative because our interest rate is much cheaper than inflation. Even if you've got a full mortgage at the bank and you're paying 3 or 4%, it's still less than inflation. So yeah. They tax electric cars harder because they don't get their cut from the petrol, possibly. But if they're now having to fill them up via electricity, then electricity is coming from dirty coal. It just doesn't add up, right? It doesn't add up. I'm not buying it. I have no interest in buying a electric car. You will not be seeing me in any electric car. Yeah. Hey mate, have you been purchasing any precious metals still, or do you have a certain entry point? There's pretty good buying out there in the precious metals market at the moment. Things are on sale. Things were, an ounce of silver now is about $31. It was probably about $35, $36. But the difference is the premiums. Go and find someone that will sell you silver at $30 an ounce. It's getting very, very difficult to be able to do so. I'm continuously buying it. I've been buying it since the year 1999, 2000. I was like 14, 15 years old. It was one of my first investments that I ever made. My first investments I actually believe that I had were fish. Believe it or not, I used to breed fish, and my background was from a fish shop. Like my family had fish shops selling different types of aquarium fish, and I used to breed fish and make money from that. And then, I started buying stuff like precious metals, and I continue to do so to this day. 35k for the Dado sounds about right. I took a stab in the dark. Adam said, what about the deeds, mate? I've read you cannot obtain originals anymore, which is a worry. A mate's old man is getting the runaround from one of the big four, and digital copies are basically junk. I did a whole webinar based on this. I actually did a segment about it in a webinar going back about 8-9 months ago. In Queensland, you never had a physical deed for the last 10 years. I've never received a deed in Queensland. In New South Wales, you had a deed. There's a lot of doomsayers out there saying that they're taking the deeds away, we're going digital, the whole world is digital. I get it. I don't think it's good that they're making title deeds digital, because then they can do other things to it, as far as, make people with higher taxes that don't participate in the world that they're in today. So they can literally get squished. So there's a lot of conformity in this system that we're playing in, but just remembering that it's all a game. And if people feel that they don't own their property, or because they don't have a title deed, even if you had a title deed, you never really own your property, because you've paid out your mortgage, you have the deed, but then if you don't pay your council rates, your state taxes, your federal taxes, you're going to be rolled from the system, and they're going to come and shake you down. So don't pay your council rates for 2 years, 5 years, whatever, and you'll see who really actually owns them to start off with. So I'm not too concerned by it, but it is, make sure if you're trying to sort something out with a title deed, that you have got a good lawyer that can do that. If you need help, reach out. I'll put you in contact with someone. But yeah. Speaking on climate change, the climate is a common good. The climate is a common good, and common good are based on Roman and Greek philosophy. Interesting. Now I see the beauty of investing in 1980s cars and koi fish. Exactly. B.Invested Q plates, historic number plates in Australia have gone up 5 times in the last 2 years. Simply the best investment in Australia. 3-digit Vic plates, now about $500,000, totally limited. Think about it. I'm not saying that they're not, right? Um, Things like plates and all that, once again, I just talked about Bitcoin. If someone needed to pay for the only reason why anything's got value, the only reason why Bitcoin went to 90 grand Aussie, the only reason why the properties are at where they're at is because of liquidity in the system, right? If there's no liquidity in the system, everything starts to fall. So the only reason why these plates, why the Datto's worth 35 grand, why the VL Commodore's worth 50 grand or whatever, is due to that there's liquidity sloshing around, all this cheap, easy credit. But if that evaporates and it becomes more expensive, etc., we're going to now see no buyers for those type of things. So the reason why they've gone up so high in value is not because a plate's the greatest investment or that the property is the greatest investment. It's just that there's liquidity out there and it's finding a home where people are going, well, I see value, I want to buy that, I want to invest in it. It's no different than, tops, ultra upper deck cards that you get of basketball players and hockey players and all those sort of card collection out there as well. I do like number plates. I have about a dozen different number plates that are pretty solid, like really, really premium sort of number plates. So I do like them. I've never paid anything for them. I've got them directly from the My Plates or whatever it is. But there is value out there. But as to saying that it's the best investment out there, it has its value, and everything only has its value. And inflation, the goods. The only reason why your can of Coke at the shop at a cafe is now $5 for a can of Coke, is due to the fact of inflation and liquidity sloshing around out there. Kiyosaki calls gold God's money. No one can print it out of thin air. Exactly. They do actually print gold and silver out of thin air. That's why they've got paper and ETFs versions of it. New Zealand banks are pulling liquidity out of the market, so lending is near impossible for investors, the opposite of beginning up of the scamdemic. Exactly, which is the importance. Someone just said KIL33R. One of my first cars when I had at school, I had a brand new car and people thought it was my parents' car, so I've got that number plate. That's a pretty funny one, Tim. So I've got pretty cool ones. I've got the number plate silver, SILVER. There's lots of different cool number plates out there which you can get access to. So just keep an eye out. The liquidity, very, very important. A lot of people would think today, I'm going to hold out from buying in the market. And this is probably my parting tip for everybody thinking about the market today. If you are sitting there thinking today, okay, I'm going to wait for prices to fall, I'm going to wait for this to happen, whatever the case may be, the access to getting the funds to be able to buy those assets while they're on sale. I've been through many different market cycles. I always want to collect as much asset as I can, as soon as I can, because if the prices fall, generally it's because no one's got any money or access to liquidity. So what is going to be your plan when you get to that point, if that ever becomes a point? The liquidity today, or in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, people will be looking back going, wow, I wish I took advantage of the market and bought a 200 grand property in 2022. You can't find even a caravan now for under $2 million. That's the important part. So understand that the liquidity being either injected into the system or being removed from the system is what's causing these markets to slosh around and go up or down. Have a plan. Make sure you have a goal for not just your cash flow, but your asset protection, your capital protection, and liquidity if we get forced to a position where there is a lack of funds out there like we're starting to see in some of these markets. If you need help on formulating a plan, building your portfolio, reach out to my team. There's a link in the description. Book an appointment, have a chat with my team. It's free. There's no cost for you to have a chat with my investor relations team. It all starts with a conversation. If you could have a conversation with someone and they could look at your position and say, look, we can increase your revenue by $100 a week. Michelle there from Blink in the comment section, we're talking beforehand about how some of our investors have been able to push up their rent by $100 a week, $50 a week, whatever. It all starts with a conversation and getting that knowledge and getting the right guidance. If you need help on that front, reach out to my team, click on the link, give us a call, 1300 367 925. And I'll be back next Tuesday to answer more questions and to talk about more and exciting topics. Catch up soon. Bye for now, guys.